Welcome to 3Ps in a Pod, the podcast about pediatrics, parenting, and perimenopause.
I'm Claudia Gray. I'm a pediatrician and a mother of 4 preteens and teenagers.
And I am Christy Herselman, author, speaker, and founder of The Chats. Now, Claudia, today we start a 4-part series on adolescence. And you and I are both parents of adolescents. My daughter's 18 and my twin boys are 16. And I know you've got teenagers as well and older children. And this is exciting because I think this is going to help a lot of parents make sense of what their young people are going through. And so we're going to start today with some really practical physical stuff and then continue through 4 podcasts.
You know, Christy, sometimes we naively think of adolescents or teenagers as those little bodies going through puberty and developing boobs and big balls, etc. But we forget that this is such a tricky stage hormonally, physically, and emotionally.
Yeah, and sometimes we see the physical changes, but they've also got a lot going on emotionally, cognitively, socially, and sometimes we feel like it's happening to us as parents, but we actually forget that there is so much going on in them. And I've actually just written a book on puberty, and I call it a puberty survival guide. And I actually had to add in the second edition for tweens and teens, because parents would buy this and go, oh gosh, yay, a book for me to survive puberty. But actually, it's not about us, it's about them.
And even though we think it's about us, Christy, because it probably is the hardest stage of parenting I've been through. And, you know, as you allude to, it's not just physical changes, it's those emotional swings, hormonal disasters, the physical element, the biological element, the brain element, the emotional element, and the social element. And we really, in the first 2 podcasts about adolescence, we're going to be unpacking the physical and brain changes today, and the next podcast will be the emotional and social changes. And not only is this important for the teens to know, but for us as parents to understand some of the nuances and behaviors of our adolescents, maybe to cut them some slack.
Yeah, it's a tough time, and I think we need to figure out how to not hold them too tight and how much space to give them to figure this stuff out, and how to not take it all personally.
Sure, hundreds.
Yeah. And so when it comes to puberty, can you just tell us some of the things that we need to know? Talk us through some of those important physical changes that we're going to see happening. I think that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. So, Christy, as a pediatrician, I've actually just opened a center for teens and young adults because they are such a unique population. And as you mentioned, the most obvious thing for all of us is the changes in the physical, but they have consequences on so many other aspects of life. So the ultimate aim of the physical changes, which are called puberty, the ultimate aim of puberty is, of course, to create human beings who can reproduce. Now, that's quite scary when we look at our little 9-year-olds going into puberty and thinking, they're supposed to become a reproducing adult. But this sounds huge. And of course, it involves a whole lot of hormonal changes and physical changes. And the physical changes that adolescents go through are in a very orderly sequence, despite the fact that it seems very disorderly. And the stages are called the Tanner stages of development. And they're important for me as a pediatrician and also for parents to know, because that stage will influence some of their physical characteristics and some of their emotional characteristics. The Tanner stages of development focus on many different parts of the body because there are so many physical changes during puberty. In girls, it's the breasts and the womb and the ovaries. In boys, it's the testes and the penis and the larynx and the voice box. In all, it's the sweat glands that change, it's the hair patterns that change, it's the bodily patterns, it's the growth spurts. So many parts of the body are involved in the stages of puberty, and we have to understand them to see where a child is. Do we need to worry that they're not far enough? Do we need to worry that they're too early, etc.?
Okay, because it is such a unique experience for every child. How does a parent know that puberty's actually started? Can you talk us through the stages a little bit?
Sure. So we talked about these Tanner stages of development, and it goes through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in theory, the earliest stage of puberty is Tanner stage 1. But the tricky thing here is that you start having these hormonal changes. So estrogen bursts in females, testosterone bursts in males. but you can't actually physically see anything yet.
Okay.
So you might notice some behavior swings or some slightly more defined behavior, but they haven't got physical changes yet. And that's Tanner stage 1. So the groundwork is being laid. Tanner stage 2 is when you can actually see the first signs physically of puberty. So in a girl, it would be breast bud development. And this can start anywhere between 8 and 13 years of age. So there's a wide range of normality in it. But as young as 8 is normal in little girls. And then the next thing is shortly afterwards, they'll develop some secondary sexual hair, so hair under the arms and the pubertal area. And that's Tanner stage 2, so breast buds, little bit of hair. And then they enter Tanner stage 3, where the hair gets a bit more coarse, the breasts get a little bit larger, the uterus enlarges. And then about 2 years after puberty has begun, their growth spurt really peaks in girls, so early, 11 or 12 years of age. And with that comes the first menstrual period. And that officially is Tanner stage 4, when they start their periods.
Okay.
After they start their periods, further developments still happen. They can still grow up to 5 centimeters after that. So notice it's the growth spurt and then the periods start, and then a little bit of growth after that. They develop a more womanly, curvy figure. So often our little girls go from little stick figures to curvaceous, and you think, oh, they've put on weight, but actually it's hormonal. And then they, develop a couple of extra changes, such as rounded breasts and nipples that stand out. But usually girls are done by the age of 16.
Wow, that makes so much sense to me, because my daughter, her feet haven't grown since she was 13. Her feet grew, and then we always joke that she needed one pair of tackies for high school, and the boys just, we're going to talk about boys in a minute, but they just kept growing and kept growing. But it almost felt like, by the time she got to high school, her physical changes, a lot of them had already happened, and she kind of plateaued. And you said by 16, they're pretty much done.
They're pretty much done.
Wow.
Boys are slightly different. So they start their puberty a little bit later. So normally between 9 and 14, so a slightly later age range for boys when they go into overt puberty. And the first sign is a sign that we as parents probably won't see unless we still see them in the bath, and that's that the testes get a little bit bigger. Okay. And Christy, as a pediatrician, I have a special little gadget with little wooden eggs of different sizes that resemble the testes. And when we're trying to determine if a little boy is late in puberty, he has to go to the bathroom with a special orchidometer and measure the size of his testes and come back and tell me what size it is. And then I can say, okay, no, he's not in puberty yet, or actually he started Tanner stage 2 of puberty, depending on the volume of the little ball, of the little egg.
That's such a wonderful, uninvasive way for a boy to do that, because that must be quite humiliating if you have a doctor doing it.
If you have a doctor doing it, I think sometimes they might exaggerate a little bit, and then the mothers and I wink at each other. But, I tell them you have to be honest so that we can see how much growth you still have to do.
That's awesome.
So that's how they start. And then they sprout a little bit of hair, and that's Tanner stage 2. In stage 3, their voice grows a little bit gruffer. Everything grows down there, the penis and the testes and the hair grows more. And then in Tanner stage 4, they're in their major growth peak, which, as I said, in girls was 11 to 12. In boys, it's normally around 14 years. So that's why there's this discrepancy that girls are often taller than boys in grade 6 and 7 and even grade 8. Then the boys grow a little bit later. But there's also this wide variety from boy to boy. And this can be quite disconcerting on your sporting performance if you're still the little guy.
Yes.
And on your confidence if you're still the little guy. So it's important to be able to tell them, this is when we predict you will have your growth spurt. And then at the end, in Tanner stage 5, they develop a very low voice, and they might have to start shaving with facial hair. But boys can grow usually up to 18, some boys up to their early 20s.
Wow. And I've seen that with the boys that I work with in high schools, is that a lot of them, they'll go on holiday, especially I find the grade 9 to 10 or 10 to 11, and they'll come back after 6 weeks and they look like different people. It's almost like they grow a little bit later, and then everyone hits it at a different age, which is so interesting.
And then you have your growth spurt when you really are in your major growth trajectory, the second major growth trajectory in your life, because your fastest growth occurs between 0 and 6 months, of
Yes.
course.
When things
And then the second fastest growth period in your life happens when you're in the main growth spurt of puberty.
Puberty. Wow.
Yeah.
I've got identical twins, as you know, and it was so interesting to me that puberty hit them differently. The one seemed to just cruise slowly through it, growing incrementally. And then the other, he seemed to hit puberty harder, where I think he was probably around 13 or 14, and he just started to eat and eat and eat and sleep so much more. And I was trying to figure out, is he growing fast because he's eating and sleeping so much? Or is he eating and sleeping so much because he's growing so fast? Now they've kind of got to the same, they look exactly the same again to most people, but it took them different journeys to get there, which I thought was so interesting. So from the physical point of view, what are some of the health consequences that our young people go through in this?
Yeah, so to the listeners, remember, we're only talking about the physical body changes now in adolescence. So there's lots of other changes with lots of other consequences. So the consequences of going through puberty and going through your growth spurt are manifold, and many that you've already alluded to. You're using an excessive amount of calories to grow in height and an excessive amount of energy. So some of your other bodily functions are really on hold for a bit. So there are 4 physical things that I see in teenagers. The first is that, yes, they are tired beings. They are fatigued. They're using all their energy for growth. Their hormones are all over the show. Their organs are changing. They're in a metamorphosis. They're like a little caterpillar sitting in a cocoon, growing like mad. And they are exhausted. So that can be normal, that they need to sleep more, that they're always tired. Of course, if the fatigue is excessive and you think, flip, they're not coping with school or with sport, you might need to think about things like iron deficiency, especially if the periods are heavy in girls, or have they had glandular fever as a virus, or are they depressed and anxious, and are they sleeping more as a result of that? But generally, teenagers are tired. And then the second point is generally teenagers are quite sickly. So we kind of think as parents, it's easy now. They're getting a cold 4 times a year, but we can handle it. And a lot of teens come to me and the parents say, there's something wrong with their immune system. They're sick all the time. They never used to be sick like that. And of course, if they didn't used to be sick like that, it's unlikely that there's a problem with their immune system if they spent 13 years being relatively healthy. But I do find that teenagers are more sickly again. So they probably get sick, not quite as much as toddlers, but probably as preschoolers in my experience, for many reasons. They're using all their energy for growth. Their immune system is lagging a little bit. Their hormones are all over the show. And also they're socializing more. So they're in close contact. They're spitting droplets on each other. And I always laugh. In toddlers, it's called crush syndrome. These recurrent viral illnesses. Teenagers, I call it the crush syndrome. Because suddenly they're in close contact, sharing germs. Teenagers are sickly souls.
And is it also maybe because they're not getting enough sleep? Does that impact it?
So the basics...
How much sleep do they need?
The basics of our immune system do include sleep, of course, and healthy eating and healthy community and not being overly stressed with 100 different types of sport. Teenagers need 8 or 9 hours a night. But remember that they often don't get it in the first half of the night because they're often on their screens or cramming for exams. And it's that sleep in the first few hours of the night before midnight that really counts a lot. So I think that's the problem. They're getting sleep at the wrong time, which is very typical of teenagers, rather than trying to catch 2 hours before midnight and then rounding up their 8 or 9 hours like that.
Because they're also naturally inclined to want to stay up later.
So
we actually need to get them into bed, especially on school nights.
We actually really do. Christy, sadly, that is one of the difficulties of the teenager, because we don't have full control over what they're doing behind closed doors, of course. And then another physical thing, which is quite obvious to the general population, is the skin. Skin talks. They get acne. It's a real sign of teenager skin. The acne can be a family thing, but it can be also driven by hormonal cycles, lack of sleep, stress that can make it worse. And lastly, which you've also alluded to, which we need to understand, especially as parents, is that teenagers are hungry. So, of course, to be able to gather together all these calories for this massive growth spurt and all these hormonal changes, teenagers need food. And the words, I'm hungry, or there's nothing in this house to eat, will be echoing through every household when your teenager is in their growth spurt. It's a very expensive stage.
Yeah.
I think our local grocery stores know every single one of my kids by name because it feels like we're in there every day.
Yes.
When I think, oh, I've done my shopping for the next few days, the next day I'll get a message from one of my kids, there's no food in the house.
Yes.
And of course, this is part of physical development of teens.
Yes. And so I'm not alone that my sons eat dinner. Usually we eat about 6:30 or so. And then just before they go to bed, they want to eat again.
Of course. And often they get out the frying pan and make a whole meal, and then it's all messy again. You are definitely not alone, Christy. You're not alone.
Okay, awesome. So there's a lot happening in their bodies, but what fascinates me so much about the teenagers is what's happening in their brains. So can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in these very complex minds and brains of our teenagers?
It's absolutely fascinating. And the brain development also explains a lot of teen habits and ways of being and behavior. So brain development is massive during the teenage years, believe it or not, because often you just see this person saying,
I'm fine.
I'm fine, and grunting. And you think, oh no, their cognitive development has gone backwards. But
they don't like me.
Weird kind of way, it's gone backwards to go forwards. So there's lots happening. There's myelination, so the lining of the nerve cells and the tails of the nerves are getting more mature, so you can send your messages faster. Cognitively, you're moving from concrete thinking, seeing everything as it is, to abstract thinking, so being able to see multiple possibilities in the future, being able to maybe, have assumptions that are not necessarily concrete. So the brain development is very vast. They start making more rational decisions, they start reasoning, they start problem solving, not always consistently, but this is a slow and steady process.
Yeah, that's so important. They kind of starting to figure things out on their own. And we're going to talk more about this in the next episode, but it can be a frustrating time for us as parents, because they used to think we were perfect and we knew everything. And now they're questioning that.
Yes.
Because their own brains are starting to develop, which is hard for us. We're not perfect in their eyes anymore.
No, we probably never were. But now they're realizing it, which is very hard. And, that sort of questioning that you're alluding to is not a lack of respect. It's brain development happening. The fact that they query everything. Why do you say that? It's normal and it's fairly
it's good.
It's fairly important. One of the mysteries of adolescence is that the brain almost develops in the wrong way.
Okay.
So your body matures before your brain is fully mature.
Okay.
So you can get these great big burly guys who do such stupid things.
Yeah.
That's because the brain develops from the back to the front.
Okay.
And the last place to develop is here, your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for more rational, adult-like, emotionally functional decisions. So teenagers can lack that prefrontal cortex full development until they're 21, 22, 23, 24. That's why some countries have made their drinking age so much later, because they realize that an 18-year-old doesn't have a prefrontal cortex yet. They're going to make such stupid decisions, especially under the influence. So the prefrontal cortex, which later is responsible for our good adult-like decision making, is not yet there. So decisions are often made in a different part of the brain, the limbic system, at the amygdala. And often those decisions are made with impulsivity, wanting immediate gratification, with aggression, with anger. So quite immature responses.
That's so interesting to me. And I think it's important for us to realize as well that this is not a defect. This is how the teenage brain is meant to be. Because I often think, well, imagine teenagers had a fully developed prefrontal cortex. They wouldn't take risks. They wouldn't because I think risk taking, and I think we can do a whole podcast on risk taking and the importance of it. They wouldn't take those risks. They wouldn't figure out, they wouldn't ask that girl out. They wouldn't, explore who they are, but it comes at a price. And we'll talk about social media in part 4 of this, but it's a tricky time where often you might say to your child, what were you thinking? And they say, well, I'm not sure. It just felt like a good idea at the time. Because of that. Okay, so that's so interesting. And then what about the physical factors? How does that impact their brain?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways. So if we see the brain as a physical organ and the changes that we've just described, that it's maturing, but that the prefrontal cortex lags, it actually, together with the physical changes like all the hormones, really clarifies for us a lot of the sort of the cognitive or brain behavior of a teenager. So as you've mentioned, they can make decisions in the wrong part of the brain. The decisions are not coming from here, they're coming from deep down in the amygdala. And of course, the amygdala loves instinctive, impulsive, poorly controlled emotions. Okay, so that is the one real repercussion of these physical changes. The other one is they're more easily influenced by physical factors. So their dopaminergic center is on fire and loves to be stimulated. And dopamine, of course, is pleasure-seeking. So teens are much more prone, apart from peer pressure aside, they're much more prone to using things or being in situations which provide instant dopamine, instant gratification. And that is why in our heads, we always see teenagers at that stage, as you say, of experimentation. Sometimes good, healthy experimentation, sometimes a little bit worse. We worry about vaping, smoking, drugs, alcohol, and they are more prone to trying that, and then they are more prone to staying with it because addictions come much more easily in teenagers than they do to mature adults. And we've mentioned also that the hormones cause a bit of brain fog. So your grunty 14-year-old boy who answers in single syllables, he's as foggy, baby, as we are as perimenopausal ladies. And we also can't help it to a degree. And especially boys, they can't multitask when they're teenagers. They can't. It's too complicated for this developing brain. They tend to live in the moment, don't they? And also, they look through a narrow lens. They think of themselves. They don't necessarily think of other people, of their family, of greater society. And that's so irritating for us, Christy, but it's actually normal for the teenage brain.
It can be frustrating, but it's and I think all of these things, they make you look at your teen in a different way. They make you realize they're going through a lot. We still want to give them boundaries. We still want to insist on respect and good manners. And even though you can't multitask, you can still clean your room and you can still, put the dishes away or whatever. But I think it just puts a new spin on things, and also I think will help us figure out how to connect with our teens and how to motivate them and how to kind of journey with them through this process rather than enduring it. And so I think in the next episode, we're going to delve more into the emotional development and the social development, because it's all tied together. So I think that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to looking at how all of the stuff that's going on in their bodies, in their brains, then works out into the way they feel and the way they interact with the people around them.
A big headache for parents often, but it's important for us to learn about that. And with that, we thank you for listening, and also want to say, remember, this podcast is by experts, but it's for educational purposes only. If you are very concerned about something in yourself or your child, please see your medical practitioner.
And please join us for the next installment on this series on adolescence. And thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful.
Until then, bye.
Bye.